Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. We're so happy that you could join us today. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Tamara Bingham Noyes. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Center for Change. We're thrilled that you could join us. I just wanted to let you know a little bit about Center for Change before we get going, just in case you're new to us. We're an eating disorder program in Utah, just outside of Salt Lake City. We treat adolescent girls and adult women in overnight care. We have both inpatient and residential, and we treat all genders in partial and IOP. We absolutely love experiential therapy at Center for Change, which is one of the reasons why our wonderful experiential therapies director, LeAnne Tolley, is here with us today, and we're so excited for her presentation. Before LeAnne gets started, I just want to go over a couple of things that you should see on your screen, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going, some things that you'll need to know throughout the webinar. So a copy of the PowerPoint is in the handout section of your toolbar. So if you click on that handout section, you'll see it there. You're more than welcome to download that or print that if you would like. Obviously, as LeAnne goes through the PowerPoint, you'll see those on the screen, but if you'd like to have a copy, it's there in the handout section. Also in that same handout section is a copy of the post-test. This is for reference only. Again, you're more than welcome to open that up or print it out if you need to keep an eye on those test questions as LeAnne goes throughout her presentation, so you can keep an eye on what those answers might be. But we'll talk more about the post-test in just a second, but you can find the printed copy there. You're welcome to submit questions in the questions section of the toolbar. Feel free to type out your questions. I'll monitor those throughout. If there are things that need to be addressed in the moment, I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll save some questions for LeAnne at the end. So feel free to submit your questions there in writing, and then I'll keep an eye, and then we'll circle back at the end of LeAnne's presentation to answer some questions. When the webinar ends, there will be an evaluation that will automatically pop up on your computer screen once I exit the webinar. If you would just take 30 seconds to answer those questions, that would be really helpful to us. That's a continuing education requirement. Those questions are. Your answers are completely anonymous, so please feel free to be straightforward about your answers, and then we tabulate those answers and send those to the CE entities. So if you just take 30 seconds to complete that when the webinar is over, that would be great. And then about an hour after the webinar finishes, you will get a separate email from GoToWebinar. It will look similar to the confirmation email that you received when you first registered. This is a separate email that will come with a link inside that email to take the online test. You must take the test online and pass it online in order to receive continuing education credit. Once you pass the test online, the continuing education certificate will automatically be downloaded to your computer. If you don't see it right away, check your downloads file on your computer. Sometimes it hides there. So keep an eye out for that email separately that will come about an hour after the webinar is finished, and that will have the link to take the online test. So that's all of our housekeeping items for the moment. So I'm going to turn it over to LeAnne. She'll tell you a little bit about what she does at Center for Change. And I'll bail out, but I'm right here, LeAnne, if you need me. So let me send it over to you.
Sounds good.
Looks good. Okay, I'll bail out. Holler if you need me.
Sounds good. Thanks. Well, hi, my name is LeAnne Tolley, and I'm the Director of Experiential Therapies at the Center for Change. And experiential therapies include all of our art therapists, movement therapists, music therapists, recreation therapists, and other experiential therapies. So I always say I have the best job in the whole world. But my formal training is in kinesiology and exercise psychology. That's what the MSK is for. And then I'm also a yoga therapist with the International Association of Yoga Therapy and a certified yoga teacher with Yoga Alliance. And so some of you may be familiar with those two designations. And I'm really excited. Usually I speak about exercise addiction and my work with patients through exercise addiction and with exercise psychology. But this time we decided to tackle using yoga and meditation therapies to work with these populations. And as you can see, this is about embracing positive embodiment. If you haven't heard that term, I'm going to use it a lot today. It is about reconnecting. So let's just get started and jump in. Yoga is the journey of the self, through the self, to the self. I love this. This is one of my philosophical sayings that I have in my office. And it kind of reflects back to philosophy. Maybe you're aware of transcendental meditation. And so I'd like to start with this picture. For frame of reference, this is my 4-year-old grandson, and he had to get glasses. And when he got glasses, he was just 3 years old, and he didn't read yet, and they weren't sure if he recognized his shapes. And so the doctor gave him a laminated card that had different shapes on it so that he could point to the shapes as he was seeing them. And the first shape that came up was this one. And he stated, "It's a tire." And then the second shape came up, and it was this one. And he stated, "That's a flat tire." And we all just laughed, but it reminded me that we all have a frame of reference, and we all are familiar with certain concepts, but we might not call them the same thing. So here's my disclaimer. If much of this sounds familiar to you, it is. Yoga, you may already be practicing many of the tenets of yoga, but know them by a different name. And so as we think about yoga, yoga is basically a foundational philosophy that's been around for thousands of years. And then about 500 to 400 BC, these philosophies were kind of written down to formalize this into a compilation of formal writings. Previous to that, it had been an oral tradition passed around and passed down from teacher to student, and there were a wide variety of yoga philosophies practiced. And a gentleman named Patanjali, he took all of these philosophies and he condensed them down and compiled them into what we call the Yoga Sutras. Sutra is a yoga word that means thread. You might be familiar with it. We see it a lot in sutures in the medical world. So we're already practicing yoga everywhere, just not aware of it. And today, most people associate yoga with learning to put your foot around your head. But the essence of yoga philosophy is learning to put your arms around the world, beginning with yourself. That's the most important part, learning to put your arms around yourself. So we have 3 learning objectives today. And the first one is to describe the mind-body disconnect created by eating disorders or ED and other mental health issues. And then I'm going to explain the 8 limbs of yoga philosophy, or Ashtangas, for those of you who practice yoga, and their positive multidimensional effects on eating disorders and other mental health therapies. And finally, most importantly, we're going to discuss simple yoga and meditative techniques to create or reconnect to that positive embodiment. So we're all familiar with this question, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And it's often difficult to identify, especially in eating disorders, which comes first, the eating disorder or the disconnect. And there's several types of physical disconnect that happen with eating disorders. I hear this a lot from my patients. The first one is disconnect from physical awareness of the body. In other words, they feel the waistband of their pants, or they feel jiggly arms or legs as they're moving, and they really don't like that sensation. And so whether the eating disorder started first and they're trying to get to a place where they lose that connection to body sensations, or whether body sensations integrated with trauma memories, and so they use the eating disorder to move away from that. One way or the other, that feeling of disconnect from physical awareness is something that most patients with eating disorders are trying to achieve, a sense of disconnect from physical body. There's also a disconnect from emotions associated with past trauma. And when we talk about trauma, we're talking the spectrum. It could be anything as simple as someone stated a comment that made me feel bad and start to think about myself negatively, to full physical and sexual emotional trauma that may happen. And so a lot of times those emotions that are associated manifest in the physical body, and we try to disconnect from our emotions so that we don't feel that sensation. And the last one is to disconnect from expectations and other mental judgments. This is where body image and our social media comes into play, where we are so just inundated constantly with these external expectations of what we're supposed to be, supposed to look like, supposed to think, supposed to say, that we want to create a disconnect from those expectations. And so we do that by disconnecting from our body. And yoga therapies are uniquely suited to restore this embodiment connection. And we're going to begin with something called chakras and then yoga on the mat. You might be familiar with this word chakra. Sometimes people say chakra, very soft CH, but it's typically pronounced chakra, like chocolate, because everything's better with chocolate. And it's a Sanskrit word that means wheel, or especially spinning wheel. And it's used in many therapeutic modalities. So chakra sound association is used in music therapy, different tones that engage with the body. And chakra color association is used in art therapy. We might be familiar with various colors for our personalities, or maybe I'm a red personality or I'm a yellow personality. And so that's how the chakras engage with art therapy, with color. And then chakra movement association is used in yoga therapy. We use various parts of the chakras where they align in the physical body to move through those emotional areas. And while all of these associations are part of chakra study, they merely reflect the main issue, which is physical engagement with emotions. Simply stated, chakras are the physical map of how emotional energy affects our physical body. I have taught chakra workshops for years, and I've spent a lot of time trying to come up with a one-sentence definition of chakras, and I finally found this, or I finally came up with this, that chakras are the physical map of how emotional energy affects our physical body. Where we feel emotions can often be attributed to why we feel emotions. And understanding this emotional map gives us insight into mind-body disconnect and associated avoidance patterns. This is how I explain it. We see color because there is a wavelength to the light spectrum. And we hear sound because there's a wavelength to the sound spectrum. And yet we see colors differently and we hear sounds differently because our eye interprets and our ear interprets those wavelengths as they're bounced back to our eye and our ear. Similarly, emotions have an energy wavelength, and I think we could all agree that we feel emotions, but we feel them differently throughout our body. When we get in like a fender bender, we might feel something in the pit of our stomach, versus when we get in an argument, we might feel something in our throat and our neck. And so emotions have a different wavelength also, and our body is the interpreter of those wavelengths. And so where we feel the emotion is often attributed to why we feel emotions. And when we can work with our patients and our clients and start to listen to how they physically feel, as well as how they emote or emotionally state, then we can start to understand that map, and it gives us insight into the disconnect and associated avoidance patterns. Here's a few ways that we can really use chakras. Working through the physical aspect of emotional energy is often a road to breakthrough. In my work, I've worked at the center for 21 years, so I'm kind of old. But in my work with clients and with patients, a lot of times they just will not have that emotional breakthrough that their therapist knows is right there on the edge. And then they'll come into a mindful stretching class or a yoga class or another movement class or a music therapy class. And all of a sudden, they start physically feeling emotions vibrate and release, if you will. And then it just brings out this flood. And so a lot of times when we can't approach something or we're just not making a breakthrough emotionally when we're speaking about our issues, when we can start moving the body in different ways, then physically we can start to bring that to the surface. And often this is a road to breakthrough. Also, recognizing the emotional patterns can help identify incorrect or negative thinking patterns and association. I'll give you an example here. With my patients, a lot of the connection to emotional energy is negative. Just that's the first place their mind goes. And so I always use this little example or test. So let's test it out with all of us. Just in your mind, think about this. I'm going to describe physical sensation, and I want you to come up with the words to describe the emotion that might be associated. So feeling pit of the stomach, a little bit of like fluttery energy there. And I'm starting to have a little bit of difficulty breathing. My face is starting to get flushed and I feel water or tears behind my eyes. Almost every time I use this example, the words that my patients bring up are, I'm feeling anxiety, I'm feeling stress, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling anger. And then I say, let's take a look at the bigger picture. Now imagine that I'm standing on a beach at sunset with my significant other down on one knee with a ring box. What am I feeling? And so then we start to recreate the pattern to connect to those emotional feelings. Because feeling is physical. Emoting are the words that we put on top to describe or to justify or to explain the physical feeling. And a lot of times we have an incorrect idea or an incorrect connection with those thinking patterns and incorrect association. We need to rebuild exactly what emotional feeling physically means to us in words. And chakras may also align with what we call emotional stages of development. This is called age of resonance. So if we think of a baby, a newborn baby is born with everything that they will need to drive a car. The only thing they're missing is time, which will grow the body, and experience, which will teach the mind. And so when they're born, they're able to do things in stages of development. 3 to 4 months old, maybe they roll over. 6 months old, they start to sit up. Maybe 12 months old, start to walk. Not everybody walks at 12 months, but sometimes they walk earlier or later. But when they are engaged with walking as their new stage of development, all of their energy, all of their thoughts are geared towards learning that stage of development. That doesn't mean that they don't still crawl around or cry or sleep, but most of their physical and emotional energy is geared towards that stage of development. They sometimes play with driving a car, but they're not ready to drive a car yet, but they're kind of playing with that physical stage of development. Similarly, with chakras, which are emotional energy, we are born with all the emotional ability we need, but at different stages in our life, we are concentrating on different emotional or energy centers. So let's take a look at them. There's 7 main emotional ideas, and we could take every single emotional aspect of our life and kind of plug it in to these different emotional ideas. The first one is the root chakra, and this is physically this is the easiest way to interpret it, all the muscles that come in contact with a bicycle seat. So that is the perineal floor. In yoga, we would call this manipura, or excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. We would call this muladhara, which means root chakra. This has to do with survival. The statement is I have shelter, I have clothing, I have food, I have safety, I have security. And the age description is 0 to age 7. And so 3-year-olds often say mine, because they don't understand. Their brain is a blank canvas, and they haven't written on their brain yet that if I give something away, if I share, it comes back to me. And so all they know is sense of loss if it goes away. If family goes to the grocery store and I'm left at home, I feel that sense of loss. And then I slowly settle into that survival. Oh, I have a house, I have shelter, I have clothing. And so we slowly settle into this survival emotion. And this is again 0 to 7. When we have issues in this area of our life, physically, it can be manifest in issues with elimination. Sometimes we will have bedwetters in younger children, maybe a little bit older, or we will have issues with constipation. We'll have issues in our physical self when we're having issues in our emotional self. The second one is the sacral chakra. For those of you who practice, this is Svadhisthana, and this has to do with our personality. The statement is, I feel. And if you see on the side, these are the colors that coordinate with it. So the root chakra is red, the sacral chakra, the second one is orange. This is I feel. This is my personality. This is age 7 to 14. The most important thing that's happening there is puberty. This is my likes, my dislikes. I'm a boy, I'm a girl. I like boys, I like girls. I love the smell of lavender. I hate the color orange. And so we have these very strong opinions, love, hate, while we settle into how we feel and how we feel the world loves us, or how we feel the world is looking at us. And so 7 to 14, moving through puberty, that is huge time to try to figure out what it means to be a growing being mentally, physically, spiritually. When we have issues in this area at this time, it can reflect in issues with reproductive organs. We can get a lot of infections, especially females, with kidney infections, bladder infections, urinary tract infections, yeast infections. For some reason, that tends to really happen a lot of times due to emotional stress. The next one is yellow. This is the solar plexus. In Sanskrit, this is Manipura. This is the power chakra. The statement is, I can do things on my own. You're not the boss of me. This is 14 to 21. This is when we're coming into our power. It has to do with what we have control over in our lives. Eating disorders fall into this area of emotional energy. When we have issues with our power, it tends to reflect in issues with our digestive system. It also tends to reflect in issues with our kidneys and with our adrenal glands, which attach to the top of our kidneys. A lot of times people feel like they have kidney issues, kidney pain, when it's actually adrenal fatigue due to things like hypervigilance from trauma, due to hyperexpression of this chakra, of trying to take control of everything, or due to lack of control in this area and falling back and not finding our own personal power. So we see those issues show up quite often. The next one is the heart chakra. This has to do with relationships. The Sanskrit name of this is anahata. This is the statement, I love. And if you notice, there's a gap there between 14 to 21 and then 28 to 35. The reason is that over the years that I've been doing this, I've been compiling, trying to think of myself as a mini Patanjali, if you will, and compiling the information of chakras into what is agreed upon by all of the modalities. And these are the ages that are agreed upon. I kind of think the reason is because after we're 21, we take a little bit of time to practice and make sure that we feel comfortable in those first 3 areas of emotion before we move further into expressions outside of ourselves. The 28 to 35, mostly this time of our life, is passions and relationships. Maybe we choose a significant other, or we choose not to have a significant other. Maybe we choose to have children or not to have children. We find a passion outside of ourselves. And when we have issues in this area, one of the things that tends to happen is we start to develop breathing issues. Most women who are not born with asthma, genetically induced asthma, actually start to develop asthma. If they do develop asthma later in life, it's in this time frame, right around the ages of 25 to 35. And men having heart attacks, and women also. It's across the spectrum. But when we have issues with our heart and our lungs, that can be a physical reflection of having emotional issues in this area. And the color is green. Green is the color of all living kind of things in our life, of nature. And so it's not necessarily red like Valentine's Day, it's green like growing things. Next one is the throat chakra. This is about communication. The Sanskrit word is Vishuddha. This is I speak. So this is age 35 to 42. Hopefully the idea is that we're starting to learn to find our voice here, that we aren't asking for a lot of support for our voice. We feel okay with our voice. This is the color of teal or light blue. It's the throat chakra. When we have issues here, we tend to have sore throats. We tend to have tight shoulders. We tend to have jaw issues, TMJ, things like that. The next one is dark blue. This is third eye. This is called Ajna. And this is wisdom. This is I see, like, oh, I understand. This is also 35 to 42, because first we find our voice, but then we refine our voice and we learn to speak a little more wisely than maybe we did when we were 8 or 10 or 12 or 16. We start to pay attention to how our words affect the world around us. When we have issues emotionally in this area, we tend to have headaches. We tend to spend a lot of time feeling pressure in our head. And it might not be a negative thing. It may just be that we're spending so much time, especially in recovery, that when we do a lot of processing, we start to have headaches and eye issues. The reason being is we're spending a lot of time with that energy idea. And the last one is the crown chakra. This is spirit or intuition. The name of this one is Sahasrara, and this means I know, those very small things that we know for sure in our life, that are constants, that are true. And this is age 42 to 49. And this one doesn't really have a physical aspect to it. However, this is the way we develop emotionally. But if we lose our job, we may go right back down to that survival root chakra and have issues there, and have to reestablish or reconnect with what does it mean to have something. And so we jump around with these emotional ideas throughout our life, and thinking about the stages of development or age of resonance with these emotional centers can really help us start to look at the way that our clients and our patients are going through their issues that might look completely different from somebody else, and we can start to get an idea of maybe the age they were when they had those issues and approach it a little differently person to person. Patterns of physical and emotional avoidance can often be identified by using those chakra maps with clients, so we can figure out maybe things they're avoiding, and then we can use that when we get on the mat if we're using asana. Asana is the name for postures on the mat. Yoga on the mat, or yoga asana, is one of the most challenging therapeutic techniques to engage in when suffering from eating disorders, because you have to slow down and recognize how it feels right now. There's no mindless, excessive movement. You have to quiet the mind and pay attention to the present moment. You can't just zone out. A lot of my patients talk about zoning out. They just want to move, because when you move your body quickly, you don't have energy for your brain to move quickly. And so it feels like you've just like cured the world's problems, because your brain, your cerebral cortex has quit functioning at a rapid level because your energy is out in your fingers and toes. You have to relax breathing and heart rate. There are no typical markers of success, such as calories burned or heart rate achieved. Interesting thing, I worked with a patient several years ago from Australia. She was a professional cyclist, and she talked about her markers and the things that meant success to her when she was cycling, and it was always very objective. There's time, there's distance, there's speed, all those different objective markers. And then I asked her what she does when she's not cycling, and she said she likes to paint. And so I looked around the room that we were in at the time, and there were 2 or 3 paintings on the walls, and I said, okay, which one's correct? And she looked at me kind of, strangely, and said, what do you mean? And I said, well, which one wins? Which one's the best? And she said, well, no, you can't talk about art that way. It's subjective. And I said, well, tell me something subjective about each one of those. And so we talked about it. And then I said, I want you to create subjective markers for your cycling. And we came up with a list, like, how does it feel to be in the breeze? And which side of the bike do I feel more comfortable moving towards if there is, something, a roadblock, something in the way? And look at subjectively markers for your exercise and for your activities. And all of a sudden, it changed her parameters of what she was looking for when she was exercising. You have to let go of those imposed expectations and listen to what feels right and comfortable today. And so you kind of let go of those objectives and come back into the subjectives. The other thing is, you can't run away. You have to sit with all the aspects of yourself. And yoga asana is really important for that key for connecting with positive embodiment. Yoga asana is what we do on the mat. That's 90% of what most people think yoga is. Embodiment is the subjective experience of the world in the physical body as a holistic being. In other words, it's the state of mind, body, spirit congruency and connection. And while chakras that we just talked about, emotional energy, and yoga asana, which is like postures, it can reopen the dialogue with physical sensation. There's so much more that has to happen to create embodiment as a positive experience. And so the word yoga comes from the word yuj or yuk, and it means to bind. And while we might be familiar with the contortion poses associated with yoga on the mat, it's only a small part of yoga. As a matter of fact, it is considered so insignificant to the practice of yoga that it's only mentioned 3 times in the Yoga Sutras. There's 8 limbs or 8 other pieces that kind of combine to create the whole philosophy of yoga. And this is where the power of using yoga and meditation really make a difference in recovery. So let's look at those. The first one is called yamas, and there's 5 yamas. These are abstinences or external disciplines, and they're kind of ideas that we decide, this is the person that I want to be, such as non-violence or non-attachment. It doesn't mean that we're like not attached to anything, but it means that we allow things to change. When you think of your grandma, and she used to say, oh, I wish you were 3 years old still. I hope you stay this young forever. Well, that's attachment. It doesn't allow for growth. And so that's the philosophy behind non-attachment, is allow the world around us to change and grow rather than being attached to what we think it's supposed to be. And then the second limb is niyamas. These are observances. They're concepts that inform our interaction with ourselves. One of the niyamas that I speak about with my patients is called sauka, and it means cleanliness. But it's not about cleaning up your room. It's about decluttering your head, cleanliness of thought. So we don't let our thoughts just kind of mosh pit together until they're so layered that we don't understand what the real problem is. Peeling away those layers is creating cleanliness in our mind. And so there's 5 different, philosophies. Self-study is one of them. We should always be studying to learn something new, but we should also always be studying ourselves. And then asana, that's the movement on the mat, the postures, putting our foot around our head. And the reason for that is to learn to accept the physical body without judgment, reconnect the mind and body together, be aware. And then pranayama. Pranayama or pranayama, those are breathing patterns. A lot of us are familiar with breathing patterns, but we don't recognize that it's not just about taking a deep breath. The most important thing that we can learn in breathing patterns is this, and I use this example with my patients. I say, have you ever been in a therapy session and you're all upset and your therapist says, just breathe, just take a deep breath? Don't you want to just punch them in the face? And they all laugh and say yes. And I said, that's because we're asking to go from a 10 to a 0. Pranayama or breathing techniques are not to take us from 10 to 0. They're to take us from 10 to 9 so that we can understand how to bring ourselves down a little bit at a time rather than drop the bottom out of our anxiety, which can be as anxiety creating as trying to let go of the anxiety. So we want to learn that sometimes we need to pick up our breath and sometimes we need to let it go, allowing our breathing to ebb and flow. And then pratyahara, this is an interesting one. This is sensory withdrawal, and it doesn't mean like lay there and be a zombie. It means to live from the inside out, letting go of those rigid external influences regarding expectations. So start to listen to how you feel rather than how you look. Several years ago, one of my patients asked me this question in a group. She asked how I deal with negative body image. And I stopped and I said, I don't think I have any body image. I don't think of myself as a picture. I think of myself as, how does my big toe feel in these shoes? I experience myself from the inside out. Not all the time, don't get me wrong. I look in the mirror to do my hair and things, but learning to feel myself as a body living rather than see myself as a body image. That's something I say to my patients every day. The next one is dharanya, and this is contemplation. And this is learning to dialogue in our head. So asking questions and then allowing the mind to contemplate rather than ruminate. So we're learning how to talk to ourselves in our head without engaging in a battle. I always tell my patients, if you have a thought that says, I hate my hair, that is violent. So that goes back to the original non-violence. But the opposite of that is not saying, I love my hair. My hair is so curly today. My hair is so shiny, because I'm still stuck with my hair. The opposite of I hate my hair is, what's the weather like today? We have to learn how to dialogue in our head without arguing, without creating a battle, without feeling like we have to engage every negative thought and overcome it. Sometimes we just got to let it flow. For those of you who do yoga, you'll recognize this as the philosophy of samavriti, fluctuations of the mind, yeah? And then as we are contemplating, asking new questions, we start to create new neural pathways in the brain. The next one is dhyana. This is meditation. listening for what comes next, moving away from habit into mindfulness and being in the moment. So just sitting there and listening. And then finally, samadhi. This is the goal of yoga, is to get to that place where we are fully aware and present. We're acting on intuition and insight, and we're finding that purpose outside of ourselves. The thing I love about samadhi is that it says, if you are sitting next to a person and you feel energy coming off of them that is negative, if you meditate on that, if you listen, you might get a thought that says, hey, I should ask them how they're doing. But if I don't act on that thought, was I really inspired? So inspiration or samadhi is the action we take on the thoughts or promptings in our head, the intuition that we receive. And I love that. Okay, so how do we put this into practice? There's many ways to incorporate, and I'm just going to go through a few of them. Number one is mindful stretching. And it doesn't have to be yoga stretches. It's just utilizing simple stretches while asking questions. That's the most important part. Have you ever been to a class, an exercise class, some kind of class where you're stretching, and the teacher will say, okay, this is what you're going to feel here. We're working the glutes and the upper edge of the medial hamstring and things, and you don't feel it that way. And then you feel like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not feeling it the way she's describing? The reason being is because you are not that teacher. We all feel things differently physically. Some of us have shorter muscles, some have longer muscles, some of our connective tissue insertion points are different. And so we want to ask ourselves, what do I feel when I do this? And then tomorrow, does this feel the same as yesterday? So we are creating the embodiment dialogue. We are reconnecting to physical. The next one is accepting downtime. This is really difficult. For most mental health issues, we want exercise to help. The benefits of exercise are very helpful to pull us out of depression and other things. In eating disorders, it's just the opposite. Excessive exercise and exercise addiction, it's also called anorexia athletica, are a common part or common connector comorbidity of eating disorders. And so accepting downtime, not as being a couch potato and useless and worthless, but as an important and essential part of health and wellness, is part of that mindful stretching. Sometimes it's just simple. We don't have to do the splits every day. And then embracing ebb and flow of mind, body, and spirit, recognizing that we're not always on or always off. Exercise addiction, exercise aversion are two ends of the same spectrum. And we feel like we're always on, we always have to be exercising, we always have to be moving, we always have to be excessive, or we have an aversion to that. And there's several reasons why. Usually the attachment and aversion are caused by the same thing. I had one client who went through the spectrum over the years. Her father body shamed her excessively. And so she became very, very, very heavy as a protective measure. So she had an aversion to exercise. But that didn't change the shaming, it just got worse. So then she went the other way and became anorexic and very, very, very thin and excessively exercising. And her father was happy, but she was dying. And so we need to recognize that ebb and flow, that we're not always on or always off. Yoga on the mat and breathing techniques, these go hand in hand. The body moves because we breathe. We breathe because the body moves. But it's not enough just to experience awareness. We have to reconnect to body sensation and reestablish body responsiveness. We have to respond to what we feel. We have to allow the physical body to be part of our experience as a being. And rumination leads to disconnection. So we want to slow the mind, and to slow the mind, you must slow the heart, and to slow the heart, you must slow the breath. When the breath slows down, awareness and mindfulness occurs. But it's the hardest thing when we have a ruminating mind to allow our mind to slow down. So we want to be talking through the slow down. We don't want to give a lot of blank time, whether we're just practicing meditation or whether we are doing yoga on the mat or whether we are just sitting discussing. We want to make sure that we have some place for the brain to land, some place for the mind and thoughts to land. Here's a couple of just asana tips if you are using asana with someone who has suffered from trauma. In my experience, I think it's important to use these with everyone because we never know who we're working with. So we want to be aware of the room alignment, of how we align our participants. We don't want anyone to have their back to a door. However, we want them to be able to see doors and windows out of their side periphery or in front of them so that they can understand how to leave the room if they need to. And we need to be aware of sound interaction. We don't want to leave blank space. We want to have some type of gentle music. It's a place for mental landing. It's a place that their brain can attach to rather than just leaving silence for rumination. If you are doing yoga on the mat, no hands-on adjustments ever. And the reason being is we never know what that will bring up for trauma, past trauma experiences. And then the other one is be aware of postural alignment. If they're laying down or if they're forward folding, these can be very open postures or very sensitive postures that they feel a little inhibited. And so we want to make sure that we always give the option to not move into postures that may feel a little aggressive. Starting with the next one, living from the inside out. We want to give permission for self-discovery and self-affirmation. We want to allow people and our clients and patients to explore. I always use this little test or this little example. We've been lied to. We have been told our whole life that we can do anything we want if we try hard enough. Well, that's not always true. I always wanted to be taller. I come from a family of very tall people. However, is that possible? Yes. I can go to another country. China has this operation where they can break my femur bones and put metal rods in to physically make me taller. Is that possible? Yes. Is it something that I would probably do? No. And so understanding what is possible. Does somebody else have a genetic and philosophical, emotional, intuitive connection to a specific talent that we might not have? Yes, and let that be okay. If you love it, try it. But when we say that we can be as good as anybody else at anything we try, if we just try hard enough, is setting ourselves up for failure. And it's also limiting us from finding what is our passion, what is our predisposition, what is our intuitively held talent that we didn't explore. We spend way too much time trying to be amazing and not enough time merely being amazed. And teaching clients to start being amazed at the world around them and then discovering how they can add to that rather than compete with that can be an amazing thing. So we ask our patients to do journaling, take a look at what they like to do. And then also checking in throughout the day, ask themselves several times a day, how does it feel to inhabit you? I always ask them as I walk through the units, where are you in space? How does it feel to be you? And they, when they're newer patients, they look at me strangely, but when they've been with me for a while, they go, oh, yeah, yeah. And we want to study anatomy and physiology because it allows a different self-perspective rather than that reflection in the mirror. Relaxation and meditation is probably one of the most important things we can do. Re means again, and lax means loose. That's why they're called laxatives. So all of you who work with eating disorder patients, you can smile about that. And meditate means listen. So relax and meditate simply means get loose and listen for what comes next. We don't have to get in a reclining position. We don't have to have music and low lighting. It's simply about letting go of stuff and just being connected to the present moment. One of the best ways to relax is to get in a group and tell jokes. And everybody looks at me like, what do you mean tell jokes? That's not relaxing. Yes, it is, because it draws you to the present moment. It connects you to your physical body, and you let go of the other stuff. Also, relaxation and meditation is a learned skill, just like playing the piano or riding a bike. You have to practice and explore. It's difficult to master, and sometimes it's really easy just to give up and say, I can't do this. I hear it a lot from my patients. I just can't relax and meditate. But it's worth the effort when you take the time to find how it works for you. And it's different for everybody. Don't feel like we have to put people into a box. So here's some tips. Allow participants to remain seated and keep eyes open. This is especially important if we're working with trauma. Not everybody feels like they can lay down on the floor. Not everybody feels like they can close their eyes in a space with a group of people. So we want to discuss what works for the participant and what doesn't. Anything that draws the mind and body into the present moment is a form of relaxation and meditation. So laughing, playing games. And then formal meditation techniques take practice to facilitate. And here's just a few that you might be familiar with. Metered breathing, that's like counting to 10, breathing in and out for 4 counts. That's pretty simple. But then we get into guided imagery, open imagery where we're offering questions about what they're experiencing, or a directed imagery where we're giving them a specific story, and hypnotherapy. And then yoga nidra, which is isolated body connection, is about connecting to the parts of the body individually. Like, how does your thumb feel? How does the palm of your left hand feel? And sometimes we can see that in progressive muscle relaxation. And then if we're really crazy, we could get into transcendental meditation. And if you've never tried this, it's interesting, but it is the philosophy of being myself, standing next to myself, observing myself, acting as myself, and then contemplating myself. So you put all that together, transcendental meditation. So here's some of the ways that we incorporate yoga philosophy. I'm lucky I have a full spectrum staff, but you might not always. But in movement therapy, we use the chakras, breathing, meditation, and connection to physical sensation. Music therapy, we use the chakras, we use toning bowls and meditation and breathing. Art therapy, we use the colors of the chakras, journaling and meditation. So there's a wide variety of ways to use yoga philosophy. It doesn't have to be just about putting our foot around our head. I tell my patients all the time, I can put my foot around my head, but it's neither useful nor attractive. And so we want to contemplate why we do what we do. Creating positive embodiment is crucial to countering negative body image and rumination. Yoga and meditation therapies are uniquely designed to support this endeavor, especially in the eating disorder recovery environment. And so I'll leave you with this. This is a statement I make to my patients every day in every group or private session that I do. We are all a body living, not a body image. So connect in there. I ask them this: can you feel, F-E-E-L, and fill, F-I-L-L, all the way to your fingers and toes? Are you a body living or merely a body image? Most important thing we can do is start to live and quit taking those pictures. Thanks for listening to me. I know this was a lot of information. And so I will turn it back over to Tamara if there are any questions. Let me see if I can make this happen.
I know you can make it happen, LeAnne. I trust in you. I believe in you. If you can't, it's okay.
Oh, I have to choose you.
Yep, you have to choose me. Oh, there we go. That's awesome. Thank you. Nicely done. Let me get my stuff up and running. Okay, we do have some questions. The first one was, do you have any references for studies on asthma later in life for women? This was a very interesting comment. She felt you made a very, very interesting comment. I'm wondering if you had any studies to reference.
I don't have any in this, but if you can get your email to Tamara, I will see what I can find to send to you. I'd be happy to.
Perfect. You can send it to the webinar email address, which is CFC, as in Center for Change, cfcwebinar@gmail.com. It's also on your confirmation emails, that same email address, so you can track me down there. Okay, the next question. If there's an adult with childhood trauma, could helping identify their digestive problems, for example, let me start over. If there's an adult with childhood trauma, could helping identify their digestive problems, for example, help you identify what chakra to go back to?
Yeah. One of the things I always say is we want to be careful about, diagnosing. We want this to be a help rather than a aha, here it is, aha moment. But yes, I'll give the example of we've always heard of people who they never learn to read, and they go through life and they become a millionaire, but they can't read. And so most of their life is very vibrant and working well, but whenever they're confronted with that reading issue, they feel concerned. So they need to go back and learn to read, but they don't go back to learn to read like they did when they were in kindergarten. We have to address it as they sit now, or as we are now as adults. Same thing here. If we've got digestive issues happening a lot, eating disorders fall into that. But if we have an adult who is constantly having digestive issues, we can go back and start to ask questions about that time of their life, which is the 14 to 21. And even prior to that, 7 to 14, when our personality is being set, and really pay attention, really focus in on when did you first notice your digestive problems and what was going on in your life at that time. And it's a really nice tool. When we think about Western medicine and Eastern medicine, Western medicine was just asking for symptoms and then physical symptoms and coming up with a conclusion. Eastern philosophies were also asking for emotional symptoms that went along with their physical symptoms. And over thousands of years, that's how they mapped or diagnosed the chakras the way they did, is because they noticed that people having these physical symptoms were also having these emotional symptoms.
Thank you. There's another question. If the client is able to empty their mind, are they still ruminating?
No. However, here's the interesting thing. We always think emptying the mind is the philosophy of meditation. And it is, unless it's not, right? So emptying our mind is a great place. Again, we call this in yoga samavriti, the fluctuations of the mind. And here's the philosophy. It says, we are typically floating along like on an inner tube in the river, and we're so worried about picking up all the leaves and other things that are floating with us and looking at them and contemplating them and throwing them away and moving it, that we never lay back and look at the sky. And so the concept of emptying our mind is that lay back and look at the sky. However, I would guess 90% of people have a really hard time getting to that. And so they totally give up on meditation. We want to teach them it's okay just to look at the stuff that's around you, and maybe this time don't pick up one thing, and next time don't pick up two things.
Got it. Okay, is the dialogue of yoga something that takes place during the practice of yoga, or does this occur separately?
All the way through. One thing that I have found with ruminating minds, when I teach yoga that is not, when I teach regular classes, just yoga classes, one of the goals is for minimal talking. Give a movement or identify a thought and then allow the person to flesh it out. When we are working with, especially eating disorders, but other mental health issues, we do not want to give a lot of blank time. So beforehand, or we can talk about yoga with them, and while we are practicing things, we want to keep a gentle dialogue going the whole time to give their mind somewhere to land.
Got it. Thank you, LeAnne. We're running out of time, so we're going to finish there with questions. But so appreciate all that you provided. And we had so many comments of folks saying, I've learned so much, and I feel the same. Go ahead. Go
Can I
ahead.
say one last thing, Tamara?
Yeah, please.
There have been a couple of people who are Yoga Alliance teachers or CIAYT. If you need continuing education, we know as yoga practitioners, this is kind of different than the CEUs for this.
Right.
Please contact me and I can give you information for getting CEUs for Yoga Alliance and for IAYT.
Perfect. I'm glad you said that. Thank you, LeAnne. And along those same lines, 2 last reminders. When the webinar ends here in just a minute, there'll be an evaluation that will pop up. Please just take 30 seconds to complete that evaluation if you would. That's a continuing education requirement for us. It's completely anonymous, so feel free to be candid and complete that when it pops up here shortly. And then about an hour from now, after the webinar ends, you'll receive a separate email from GoToWebinar with the link in there to take the online test. You must take the test online and pass it in order to receive continuing education credit today. And once you pass, your continuing education certificate will automatically be downloaded to your computer. So if you don't see it right away, take a look in your downloads file because it's likely there. Thank you again for joining us today. Our next webinar is Thursday, March 25th. It's the 3rd in our series of the gut brain series that we're doing with Dr. Heather Finley, and they're awesome. So we'd love to have you join us again. In the meantime, please be safe and well. Take care.